The topic of discussion is classes of carbohydrates, classes of dietary fiber. One thing that I notice with medical doctors, diabetes experts, if you want to call them that, sometimes he or she will take carbohydrates and just generalize, put it into one category, one class. And the same thing with dietary fibers. And so the point of this video, if you have diabetes, or let's just say you're just looking to inform yourself on maybe how fiber works in the body, I believe this video may be for you. Now we're going to consider the classes of carbohydrates: monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Now when you hear monosaccharide, think of one: glucose or fructose. They're not bonded together, mind you. Have you ever heard of agave nectar or fruits containing fructose? With disaccharides, think of glucose and fructose, but now bonding occurs to make sucrose. Sucrose is made up of glucose and fructose, a disaccharide. When it comes to a polysaccharide, think of more things bonded together. And there's a class of polysaccharides. For example, starch, dietary fiber, and glycogen. Glycogen meaning in humans, and starch in plants. Now that we know the classes of carbohydrates, I really want to focus on polysaccharides, the subdomain below that, which would be starch and dietary fiber. Now when it comes to fiber, there is a class of its own. When it concerns soluble fiber, when put in water, and if we heat it, whether it be oats, it may give a smooth texture. Now, depending on what oats you buy if you go to the store, so not only will you feel the smooth texture, but maybe a rough texture as well. Maybe insoluble fiber is added into it. Now, before I continue, I want to give an example of plant anatomy and where starch and these actual fibers come into play. Now this is interesting because I use humans as an example. With humans, we have skin, muscle, we're protecting our vital organs in some way, right? Well, the same thing with the plant anatomy and what it is composed of. So these dietary fibers protect the actual important part of the cell. There are certain properties that come into play, as noted before: insoluble, insoluble, hydrophobic, and etc. And within this actual plant anatomy, there's also starch, which is the energy storage of the cell. So you would consider whole grains. Interesting. Now some of you may have heard of starchy and non-starchy vegetables. So let's just consider the starchy vegetables. The selection is grains, cereals, pasta, baked potato, and the list goes on. Now, let's consider starch. Remember I was talking about polysaccharides and the chain? Well, think of it like this. There's amylose, alpha-1,4 glycosidic bond. Now, think of a chain. That is amylose. Then there's amylose pectin, alpha-1,4 and alpha-1,6 glycosidic bond. Okay? And just think of now a chain, but with branches coming off of it. And if we consider amylose, there's an enzyme called amylase which acts on it. So let's just say break it down. Now cellulose is slightly different depending on who you talk to. The bonding, for example, is beta-1,4 glycosidic. So in other words, cellulose, the actual enzyme amylase does not act on it. So we do not necessarily absorb it. However, cellulose, classified as a dietary fiber, can be fermented in the gut. And with amylose, there's an enzyme amylase which acts on it, breaks it down for absorption. So we have to consider starch, starchy vegetables, and in the body, in layman's terms, the end result of what happens to it. At some point, it will be converted to glucose. And that is where I really want to talk about fiber, grains, and that separation. So therefore, you're getting an influx of glucose, which is not necessarily a good thing anymore. Now, if it was consumed in moderation, a possibility. Now, let me make this clear. There are some people in the plant-based community that say, I can eat tons of this. This meaning whole grains and starchy vegetables and get the vitamins from it. However, again, we are different. My friend, he can eat all the bread he wants and he has a difficult time gaining weight. When it comes to my other friend, when he does the same thing, guess what? He gains weight, breaks out in acne, and a lot of other things, which I won't talk about here. Okay, so we talked about the classes of carbohydrates, monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. And then there's a subdomain below that of polysaccharides consisting of dietary fibers and starch. We talked about starch, the subdomain below that of amylose and amylose pectin. Now we're going to talk about dietary fibers and basically show the differences. We learned about insoluble and soluble fiber, but let's just give an example. Let's just say you eat a strawberry. A strawberry may have pectin, a soluble fiber with a smooth texture, and then there's the hard parts, maybe the seeds and all things that are insoluble. Let's talk about what soluble fiber consists of. Some hemicellulose, pectin, gums, and beta-glycans. Okay, with beta-glycans or glucans, depending on who's pronouncing it, it's in oats. And with gums, this is the interesting thing. I was talking about the plant. And let's just say if there's a site of injury on the plant, there are specialized secretory cells that act, and this is where the role of gums come into play, to push out something that may pose harm to the plant and may allow the plant to regenerate and heal itself in some way. And there are a lot of other things going on, but I just wanted to generalize it. So moving on to insoluble fiber, there's also a selection consisting of ligands, cellulose, and some hemicellulose. At this part of the video, I really want to do an overview of how the properties of soluble and insoluble fiber. So with soluble fiber, some people who ingest it may say, I feel full. I don't feel like I need to eat. And maybe he or she will decrease calorie intake, which may help with weight loss, but that depends on the person. But with soluble fiber, it has the ability or capability to bind to nutrients or selected substances. So basically what that means is, if we consider nutrients and the binding of maybe certain things that pose risk for our health, well, it can bind to nutrients and to the things that we consider bad and pull it out of the body, and we may excrete it. Now, that's both good and bad. We want to keep the nutrients we're ingesting, right? We want to absorb the nutrients we ingest. But let's just say if a person eats soluble fiber in excess or puts it in the diet or nutrition plan in the wrong way, it may actually pull nutrients from the body. Or maybe something's going on that we have to have enzymes come into play to pull apart or degrade, whatever. And some individuals may report nutritional deficiencies. So there's a lot of things going on here that we have to consider. So when it comes to insoluble fiber, just like soluble fiber, fermentation occurs, okay? And this may generate or promote different things we may want. Like, for example, it may promote good bacteria in the colon. There are certain things that we generate as well. Short-chain fatty acids, energy for colonic cells. We may stimulate mucosal cell proliferation. There's also the pH of the lumen of the colon. And this is where there could be a decrease in secondary bile acid synthesis. And this has to do, I believe, with cancer. So it may act as a key prevention to cancer and harmful things forming in our colon that we don't want. So there's another benefit that we really don't know about. And that's where the plant-based community comes into play and says, hey, this is the benefit of plant-based dieting or plant-based approach when it concerns lifestyle. But that may be true for some of us, but it's so important to consider what source of fiber and all things. If we do this the wrong way to go about, we may alter nutrient balance. Do you understand where I'm coming from? So at this point, I think I covered enough information. I really wanted to go into greater detail, but at this point, I feel we covered enough in this video. So tell me what you think. Post some comments below. I would like to hear from you. Thank you.